war for as long as Stephen could remember. It was a conflict that stretched across star systems, a web of alliances and enmities so tangled that no one could recall how it had all begun among the chaos. The small planet Elysium had been a beacon of peace and prosperity, untouched by the war's tenders. That was until the coup. Stephen, a decorated soldier with a reputation for bravery, had seen his fair share of battles. He had fought in the trenches of Calexian, led raids on the orbital stations of Xanthar, and survived skirmishes in the deadly asteroid belts of the Hickson sect. Yet, amidst the vastness of the conflict, a new mission had emerged. One that seemed as mundane as it was mysterious. Escort a high-priority individual from a refugee planet. He had been given no details, just coordinates and the assurance that the mission was crucial. It was a far cry from the adrenaline-pumping battles he was accustomed to, but orders were orders. As his ship, the Nebula Strider, broke through the thick atmosphere of Carthus, a small, desolate planet on the edge of the Milky Way, Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this mission. Carthus was a known haven for refugees and exiles, a place where the war-weary sought solace in anonymity. The planet's surface was a barren wasteland of red rocks and dust storms, punctuated by the occasional cluster of makeshift shelters and small outposts. The inhabitants lived in a state of constant flux, always wary of the shifting allegiances and fragile. Stephen touched down in the largest together like frightened children. The air was thick with the scent of despair and the acrid stench of recycled oxygen. He stepped off the landing ramp, his boots sinking slightly into the dusty ground, and adjusted his helmet's visor to filter out the glare from the twin suns. He was greeted by a local contact, a scruffy man with a nervous demeanor who led him through the winding alleys of the settlement. She's been waiting. Contact said, eyes darting around as if expecting trouble at any moment. Not many know who she is, but those who do, they speak of her in hushed tones. They say she's different, special. Space and passive. They arrived at a small, inconspicuous tent. The contact stopped and gestured towards the entrance. She's inside. Be careful, soldier. She's seen things, lived through things that would break most of them. With a nod, Stephen entered the tent. The interior was dimly lit, the air cool and scented with a faint, floral aroma. As his eyes adjusted, he saw her. She stood with her back to him, her figure outlined against the soft glow of a small lamp. She was tall and slender, her posture regal despite the modest surroundings. Her hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall of silver, and she wore a simple cloak that only hinted at the elegance beneath. Monsieur Princess Celestia, I presume. Stephen spoke, his voice steady but respectful. She turned, and for a moment he felt as if time itself had slowed. Her eyes, a deep luminescent blue, met his with a gaze that seemed to pierce through to his very soul. They were eyes that had seen too much, eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 sorrows, and yet held a glimmer of hope. Her face, though marked with lines of worry and exhaustion, was undeniably beautiful. There was a strength in her expression, a quiet determination that belied her delicate appearance. You presume correctly, she replied, her voice soft yet commanding. And you must be Stephen, the soldier sent to escort me to safety. Stephen nodded. My orders were to ensure your safe passage, but I was not given details. I understand you're the rightful heir to Elysium. Celestia's gaze faltered for a moment. A shadow of pain crossing her face. It was yes. My family ruled Elysium for generations, but that was before the coup. Now, I am nothing but an exile, a fugitive running from the past. Stephen sensed the depth of her sorrow, but he also saw the flicker of resolve in her eyes. I'm here to help you, Princess. Whatever it takes, we'll get you to safety. Celestia smiled faintly, a smile tinged with sadness and gratitude. Thank you, Stephen, but there's more at stake than just my safety. My people, they need me. Elysium needs me. I must return, reclaim my throne, and end the suffering brought upon by the usurpers. Her words were resolute, her voice steady. Stephen felt a surge of admiration for her courage. He had seen leaders crumble under far less pressure, yet here she stood, ready to face her destiny despite the dangers. Then we will find a way, he said, his tone firm with conviction. First, we need to get you off this planet. It's not safe here. Celestia nodded, like your expression thoughtful. There are those who still believe in the old ways, in my family's legacy. They hide among the stars, waiting for a signal to rise. If we can reach them, we might have a chance. Stephen considered her words. The mission had just become much more complex than he had anticipated. It was no longer just about escorting a princess. It was about rallying a resistance, orchestrating a revolution. But he was no stranger to impossible odds, and if anyone could succeed, it was this woman who stood before him, with her unwavering determination and unyielding hope. They left the tent, moving quickly through the settlement's winding paths. Stephen kept a wary eye on their surroundings, sensing the tension in the air. Carthus was a volatile place, and the presence of an exiled princess could attract unwanted attention. As they reached the outskirts, a low hum filled the air, a sound that sent a chill down Stephen's spine. "Get down," he shouted, pulling Celestia to the ground as a blast rocked the settlement. The night sky lit up with the glow of laser fire, and the unmistakable silhouette of bounty hunters loomed overhead. "They found us," Celestia whispered, her voice tight with fear. Stephen drew his blaster, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Stay close to me. We'll get out of this." A firefight ensued, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone. Stephen moved with precision, his training kicking in as he fired at the attackers. Celestia stayed close, her face set in a mask of determination. She wasn't just a damsel in distress. She was a warrior willing to fight for her people. As they made their way through the chaos, Stephen caught sight of their contact, the scruffy man who had guided him earlier. He was pinned down behind a stack of crates, his face pale with fear. Stephen motioned for him to follow, and together they fought their way to the landing pad. The Nebula Strider stood waiting, its engines already humming. Stephen ushered Celestia and the contact on board, firing a few final shots before sealing the hatch. He raced to the cockpit, his fingers flying over the controls as he prepared for takeoff. "We're clear," he called out, and the ship lifted off, soaring into the night sky. As they broke through the atmosphere and into the safety of space, Stephen breathed a sigh of relief. The danger was far from over, but they had escaped the immediate threat. In the cockpit, Celestia stood beside him, her expression one of quiet resolve. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the ordeal they had just endured. "For saving me, for believing in me." Stephen met her gaze, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He had fought for countless causes, served under numerous commanders, but there was something different about this mission. Something different about her. "It's not just about you," he replied, his voice soft. "It's about what's right. And I believe in your cause, Princess." Celestia smiled, a genuine smile that warmed the cold depths of space around them. "Then we will succeed," she said, her eyes shining with hope. "Together, we will reclaim Elysium and bring peace to our people." As the stars stretched out before them, a vast uncharted expanse, Stephen felt a sense of purpose unlike any he had ever known. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, the path uncertain. But with Celestia by his side, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness. And so, with the galaxy in turmoil and their future uncertain, a soldier and a princess set forth on a journey that would change the course of their lives and the fate of countless others. Their mission had only just begun, but already, it was clear that it would be a journey unlike any other, a journey of courage, love, and the unbreakable will to fight for what was right. The Nebula Strider hummed with a quiet urgency as it cut through the void of space. Inside the cockpit, the glow of the control panels cast a soft light on Stephen's focused face. He glanced at the coordinates displayed on the screen, mentally plotting their route to the nearest safe haven. Beside him, Princess Celestia sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes scanning the star-studded expanse beyond the viewport. The remnants of their narrow escape from Carthus lingered in the silence, a tension that neither of them could shake. Celestia broke the quiet first, her voice a soft murmur. "Do you think they'll follow us?" Stephen glanced at her, noting the faint worry lines that creased her forehead. He admired her bravery, but he could see the toll that recent events had taken on her. "It's possible," he admitted, keeping his tone calm. "Bounty hunters are relentless, especially when there's a price on your head." Celestia nodded, her gaze distant. "I should have expected this. The new regime will stop at nothing to see me captured or killed. They see me as a threat to their rule." Stephen adjusted the ship's course, setting them on a path through a nearby asteroid field. "We'll use this field to shake them off our trail," he explained. "It's dangerous, but it should buy us some time." As they approached the asteroid field, the ship's sensors began to beep with increasing frequency, signaling the presence of potential hazards. Stephen's hands moved deftly over the controls, weaving the Nebula Strider through the floating rocks with practiced ease. Celestia watched in silence, her admiration for Stephen's skill growing. He was more than just a soldier. He was a masterful pilot, capable of navigating the most treacherous of spaces. The ship shuddered slightly as a near-miss rock grazed their shields. Stephen's jaw tightened, but he remained focused. "Hold on," he warned, increasing their speed. The asteroids blurred past them, a dizzying array of shadows and shapes. Celestia gripped the armrests of her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. Just as they emerged from the asteroid field, the ship's proximity alarms blared. Stephen cursed under his breath, scanning the sensors. A squadron of bounty hunter ships had picked up their trail, closing in fast. The lead ship, a sleek, menacing vessel, bore the unmistakable insignia of the Seraphim Syndicate, a notorious group known for their ruthless efficiency and high-profile captures. "They're here," Celestia whispered, her voice tinged with fear. Stephen's mind raced. The Syndicate's reputation was well-earned. They were not to be taken lightly, but he had faced worse odds before. He glanced at Celestia, her face pale but resolute. There was no time for hesitation. "I'll handle the controls. You get to the turret," he ordered, his voice firm. "We need to fend them off." Celestia nodded, her expression hardening. She rose from her seat and made her way to the ship's rear, where the turret controls awaited. Stephen watched her go, feeling a surge of respect. She might have been a princess, but she was no stranger to danger. She was willing to fight for her freedom, and that kind of courage was rare. As the first shots rang out, the Nebula Strider jerked violently. Stephen's hands flew over the controls, pulling the ship into a sharp roll to evade the incoming fire. The Syndicate ship spread out, forming a net to trap them. Stephen's eyes flicked over the tactical display, analyzing their formation. They were good, coordinated, disciplined. Celestia's voice crackled over the comms. Targeting the lead ship, she reported, her voice steady. "Ready to fire on your mark." Stephen felt a flicker of pride. She was a natural. "Wait for my signal," he instructed, his eyes narrowing as he maneuvered the ship. He could see the faint glow of their thrusters as they prepared for a coordinated assault. They were trying to box him in, force him into a position where escape would be impossible. But Stephen had other purposes. With a sudden burst of speed, he dove the ship downward, skimming the surface of a large asteroid. The Syndicate ships followed, closing it fast. Stephen's fingers danced over the controls, his eyes locked on the tactical display. He was waiting for the perfect moment, the split-second opening that would turn the tide. "Now," he shouted. Celestia's response was immediate. The ship's turret roared to life, spitting a barrage of laser fire at the lead Syndicate vessel. The shot struck true, slicing through its shields and disabling its engines. The ship lurched, spiraling out of control. Stephen seized the opportunity, pulling the Nebula Strider into a sharp turn and weaving through the debris. The remaining Syndicate ships scrambled to adjust, their formation momentarily broken. Stephen pushed the ship's engines to their limit, rocketing past the disabled vessel and into open space. The distance between them and their pursuers widened, the bounty hunters struggling to keep up. As they broke free of the asteroid field, Stephen activated the ship's cloaking device, rendering them invisible to the naked eye and most scanners. The Syndicate ships slowed, confused, their sensors sweeping the area in vain. Stephen allowed himself a small smile. They had bought themselves some time. In the quiet that followed, Stephen set the ship on autopilot and leaned back in his seat, exhaling a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding. His body ached from the tension, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins kept him alert. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Celestia entering the cockpit, her face flushed with exhilaration. "Nice shooting," Stephen said, offering her a small grin. Celestia smiled, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "Thanks, I had good training, but I've never been in a real dogfight before." She hesitated, then added, "I'm glad you were here." Stephen's grin widened. "Just doing my job, Your Highness." Celestia shook her head, her expression softening. "It's more than that, Stephen. You're risking your life to help me, a stranger. Not many would do that." Stephen shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's not just about you," he repeated, echoing his earlier sentiment. "It's about what you represent. Hope, justice, all that good stuff." Celestia's smile faded slightly, replaced by a somber look. It's hard to believe in those things sometimes, she admitted, especially after everything that's happened. Stephen understood her doubt. The galaxy was a dark place, full of betrayal and cruelty. But he also knew that people like Celestia were rare leaders who inspired loyalty and fought for something greater than themselves. That's why we have to keep fighting, he said quietly. For those who can't, Celestia nodded, our eyes thoughtful. You're right, we can't give up. She looked out the viewport, the stars reflecting in her eyes. We have to keep moving forward no matter what. As they traveled through the vastness of space, the ship's cloaking device kept them hidden from prying eyes. They passed through nebulae that glowed with ethereal light, skirted the edges of black holes that threatened to swallow them whole, and navigated the treacherous currents of space storms. Stephen and Celestia spent hours in the cockpit, planning their next moves, sharing stories and growing closer with each passing moment. One night, as they drifted through a particularly beautiful nebula, Stephen asked Celestia about her family. She hesitated, then began to speak, her voice soft and filled with emotion. She spoke of her parents, who had ruled Elysium with wisdom and compassion, of her siblings, each with their own strengths and quirks, and of the day everything changed, the day the cube tore their world apart. Stephen listened, his heart aching for the pain she had endured. He couldn't imagine the horror of losing one's family, one's home, so violently. Yet, despite it all, Celestia had survived. She had found the strength to keep going, to fight. It was that strength, that unbreakable spirit, that drew him to her. As she finished her story, Celestia looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I miss them, she whispered, every day, but I can't let their deaths be in vain. I have to make things right. Stephen reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You will, he said with conviction. We'll make sure of it. Celestia smiled through her tears, a small but genuine smile. Thank you, Stephen, for everything. As the days blurred together as they continued their journey, by each passing or bringing them closer to their destination. Along the way, they encountered more dangers, pirates looking to loot their ship, rogue drones from a long-forgotten war, and the ever-present threat of syndicate agents. But through it all, Stephen and Celestia faced the challenges together, their partnership growing stronger with each trial. One particularly harrowing encounter occurred in the remnants of an ancient battlefield, a graveyard of ships and debris from a long-ago war. As they navigated the twisted wreckage, the ship's sensors picked up an anomaly, a derelict vessel with a faint life sign. Against his better judgment, Stephen decided to investigate, hoping to find a survivor in need of help. They docked with the derelict ship, a battered cruiser from the old Elysian fleet. As they explored the darkened corridors, the air thick with dust and decay, they discovered the source of the life sign. A single survivor, a young woman barely clinging to life. She was weak and disoriented, her clothes tattered and her body covered in bruises. Celestia recognized her immediately as Talia, a former palace guard who had been presumed dead in the cut. As she regained consciousness, Talia revealed crucial information about the Coué and the current state of Elysium. She spoke of the Resistance, a growing movement led by loyalists who still believed in the rightful rule of the royal family. Talia had been on a mission to gather intelligence when her ship was ambushed, leaving her stranded in the wreckage for days. The news reignited Celestia's determination. The Resistance was more organized than she had hoped, and with their support, she had a real chance of reclaiming her throne. Stephen listened intently, formulating a plan in his mind. They needed to make contact with the Resistance, rally the loyalists, and prepare for the battle ahead. But first, they had to reach the designated rendezvous point, a small moon on the outskirts of the system, where a trusted ally awaited. As they neared their destination, the tension aboard the ship grew palpable. They were stepping into the heart of the conflict, where the stakes were highest. Stephen and Celestia shared a quiet moment in the cockpit, the weight of their mission heavy on their shoulders. Are you ready for this? Stephen asked, breaking the silence. Celestia looked at him, her expression resolute. I don't have a choice, she replied. My people need me. I can't let them down. Stephen nodded, understanding her resolve. We'll get through this, he promised, together. As the moon came into view, a small, unassuming rock orbiting a distant gas giant, Stephen felt a surge of anticipation. This was the beginning of the endgame, The first step in a journey that would lead them to the heart of the battle for Elysium. They were ready as they could be. The ship descended towards the moon's surface, the barren landscape stretching out beneath them. Stephen spotted the signal beacon, a faint blue light blinking in the darkness. He set the ship down gently, the landing gear touching the ground with a soft thud. As they disembarked, the cold, dry air hit them, a stark contrast to the warm, controlled atmosphere of the ship. Stephen scanned the area, his hand hovering over his blaster. Celestia stood beside him, her eyes sharp and alert. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing man with a scar running down the side of his face. He approached with cautious steps, his eyes locked on Celestia. As he drew closer, recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a deep, respectful bow. "For your highness," he greeted, his voice rough but respectful. "It's an honor to see you alive." Celestia inclined her head, a regal gesture despite her simple attire. "Thank you, Captain Lyra," she replied, her voice steady. "It's good to see a familiar face." Captain Lyra straightened, his expression grave. "The resistance is ready, Princess. We've been waiting for this moment, but there's much to discuss, and time is short." Stephen watched the exchange, feeling a surge of anticipation. This was it, the moment they had been working towards, the beginning of the end of their long journey, and the start of a new chapter in the fight for Elysium. As they followed Captain Lyra into the underground hideout, Stephen couldn't help but glance at Celestia. She walked with purpose, her head held high. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, she was ready to face whatever lay ahead, and Stephen knew, with absolute certainty, that he would stand by her side no matter what. The fight for Elysium was just beginning, and the road ahead was fraught with peril. But together, they were unstoppable, and as they stepped into the darkness, ready to face the unknown, Stephen felt a spark of hope. A hope that they would not only survive, but emerge victorious, stronger than ever before. The underground hideout was a maze of tunnels carved deep into the rocky surface of the moon. Captain Lyra led them through the dimly lit passages, the walls lined with pipes and cables humming with electricity. The air was cool and filled with the faint scent of metal and ozone. Stephen's eyes adjusted to the low light, his senses on high alert. He could feel the tension in the air, a palpable energy that spoke of the hidden dangers and secrets lurking within these walls. Celestia walked beside him, her posture straight and regal despite the grime and weariness etched into her features. Stephen glanced at her, admiring her resilience. She had been through so much, yet her spirit remained unbroken. He marveled at her strength, a quiet strength that had carried her through unimaginable trials. As they moved deeper into the hideout, the sounds of activity grew louder. The murmur of voices, the clatter of machinery, the distant hum of power generators. They emerged into a large open chamber that served as the nerve center of the resistance. The room buzzed with activity, filled with people working at consoles, discussing strategies, and monitoring communications. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of urgency, a stark contrast to the isolation and uncertainty they had faced in space. Here, there was a purpose, a clear direction. It was a gathering storm brewing with the promise of rebellion. At the center of the room stood a massive holographic display, projecting a detailed map of Elysium and its surrounding space. Stephen's eyes were drawn to the red markers indicating enemy positions, the fortified strongholds of the regime that had usurped Celestia's throne. It was a daunting sight, a stark reminder of the scale of the challenge they faced. But it was also a beacon of hope, a symbol of the Resistance's growing strength and determination. Captain Lyra led them to a raised platform where a group of leaders stood, deep in discussion. As they approached, the conversation hushed and all eyes turned to Celestia. There was a moment of silence, a collective intake of breath, as if the very presence of the exiled princess was a revelation, a confirmation of their cause. Stephen felt the weight of their gazes, the unspoken hope and expectation that rested on Celestia's shoulders. One of the leaders, a tall woman with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, stepped forward. She wore a uniform reminiscent of the old Elysian military, a symbol of loyalty and defiance. Her expression was a mixture of respect and cautious optimism. "Your Highness," she said, her voice steady. "It's an honor to have you with us. I'm General Seraphine, commander of the Resistance forces." Celestia inclined her head, our eyes meeting Seraphine's with a calm, steady gaze. "Thank you, General. It's good to see that Elysium still has brave souls willing to fight for its freedom." Seraphine nodded, a a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We've been waiting for this moment," she replied. "Waiting for the day when we could stand with you and reclaim our home." Celestia's expression softened, a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. "I can't do this alone," she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "I need all of you and more. The road ahead is perilous and the enemy is powerful, but together we can restore Elysium's rightful place in the galaxy." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, a wave of resolve and determination. Stephen felt a surge of pride, not just for Celestia, but for the people gathered here. They were warriors, rebels, dreamers, each one ready to sacrifice everything. It was a powerful reminder of the stakes, the high cost of their struggle. As the initial introductions concluded, the leaders moved to the strategy table, where a detailed plan was laid out. General Seraphine gestured to the holographic map, her expression serious. "Our scouts have gathered intelligence on key targets," she explained. "The regime's forces are concentrated in several strongholds, including the capital city and the royal palace. Our goal is to weaken their defenses and rally the people to our cause." She paused, her eyes flicking to Celestia. "Your presence will be a symbol of hope, a rallying point for the resistance. We need to broadcast your return. Let the people know that their princess is alive and ready to lead them." Celestia nodded, her expression resolute. "We must be careful," she cautioned. "The regime will try to discredit me, paint me as a threat to stability. We need to show the people that I am here for them, that I stand for justice and peace." Stephen watched as the discussion unfolded, his mind racing with possibilities. They needed to be strategic, precise. A direct assault on the capital would be suicide. They had to weaken the enemy's grip from within, sow seeds of dissent and doubt. He voiced his thoughts, suggesting a series of coordinated strikes on key infrastructure, communications, supply lines, and military outposts. The idea was to cripple the regime's ability to respond and spread their forces thin, making it easier for the resistance to gain ground. The plan was met with nods of approval, the leaders quickly refining the details. They assigned teams to various tasks, each group responsible for a different aspect of the operation. Celestia would address the people via a secure broadcast, while the resistance forces launched their attacks. It was a risky plan, but it was their best shot. As the meeting drew to a close, Stephen felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Captain Lyra, his expression serious. "We have a lot of work ahead," Lyra said, his voice low. "But with you and the princess on our side, I believe we have a real chance." Stephen nodded, appreciating the sentiment. "We'll do whatever it takes," he replied. "For Elysium," Lyra's gaze softened, a hint of respect in his eyes. "I can see why she trusts you," he said quietly. "Just make sure you don't let her down." Stephen met his gaze, a silent promise in his eyes. "I won't." Over the next few days, the hideout became a hive of activity. Resistance fighters trained tirelessly, honing their skills and preparing for the upcoming operations. Engineers and technicians worked around the clock, fine-tuning equipment and setting up the broadcast. The atmosphere was a mix of excitement and tension, a charged energy that seemed to permeate every corner of the base. Celestia spent her days in meetings, strategizing with the resistance leaders and reaching out to potential allies. Her presence was a beacon of hope, a reminder of what they were fighting for. She spoke with a calm authority, her words inspiring and rallying. Stephen watched her with a growing admiration, marveling at her ability to lead with both strength and conviction. One evening, as the base settled into a rare moment of quiet, Stephen found Celestia, alone in a small observation room, gazing out at the stars. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the stars casting a gentle light on her features. She looked lost in thought, her expression pensive. Stephen approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked softly, leaning against the doorway. Celestia turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "Just thinking about everything," she replied, her voice soft. "It's a lot to take in." Stephen nodded, understanding. "It is," he agreed. "But you're doing great, the people believe in you." Celestia's smile widened slightly, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I hope so," she murmured. "I can't help but worry about the future, about what comes next." Stephen stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You're not alone in this," he reminded her. "We're all here with you, and we'll see this through, no matter what." Celestia looked up at him, her eyes searching his. For a moment there was a vulnerability there, a glimpse of the weight she carried. But then she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thank you, Stephen," she said, her voice sincere, "for everything." Stephen felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet contentment. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll make it," he promised. "Together." As the day of the operation approached, the tension in the base heightened. The resistance fighters prepared for their missions, checking and rechecking their equipment. The engineers fine-tuned the broadcast system, ensuring that Celestia's message would reach every corner of Elysium. It was a delicate operation, one that required perfect timing and coordination. The night before the mission, the leaders gathered for a final briefing. The room was filled with a sense of anticipation, a collective breath held in suspense. General Seraphine stood at the head of the table, her expression grave but determined. She laid out the final details, emphasizing the importance of each team's role. Celestia would broadcast her message from a secure location, while the resistance forces launched their attacks on key targets. The goal was to create chaos and confusion, weakening the regime's hold on the planet and rallying the people to the resistance's cause. It was a bold plan, but it was their best shot. As the briefing concluded, Stephen felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they had been working towards, the culmination of their efforts, their hopes, their dreams. He glanced at Celestia, who stood tall and confident, her eyes blazing with determination. She was ready, and so was he. The next morning, the base was a flurry of activity. The resistance fighters donned their gear, readying themselves for the battle ahead. Celestia and Stephen prepared for the broadcast, setting up in a small, secure room deep within the hideout. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension palpable. As the countdown to the broadcast began, Stephen felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. He glanced at Celestia, who stood before the camera, her expression calm and composed. She looked every bit the princess, regal and poised. The broadcast began, and Celestia's voice filled the room. She spoke with a quiet authority, her words clear and resonant. She addressed the people of Elysium, speaking of the past, the present, and the future. She spoke of her family's legacy, of the coup that had torn their world apart, and of her desire to restore peace and justice. Her words were a call to arms, a rallying cry for those who believed in a better future. As she spoke, Stephen watched her, his heart swelling with pride. She was magnificent, a true leader. He could see the effect she had on the people, the way her words resonated with them. It was a powerful moment, a turning point in their struggle. The broadcast ended, and for a moment there was silence. Then the room erupted in cheers, a wave of relief and exhilaration. The mission had begun, and there was no turning back. As the resistance forces launched their attacks, chaos erupted across Elysium. The regime's forces scrambled to respond, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught. Communications were disrupted, supply lines cut, and key military installations targeted. The resistance fighters struck with precision, their actions coordinated and effective. Celestia's broadcast spread, like wildfire reaching every corner of the planet. The people reacted with a mixture of shock and awe, many unable to believe that their princess was alive. The message ignited a spark of hope, a renewed sense of purpose. Across Elysium, people began to rise up, joining the resistance in their fight against the regime. Stephen and Celestia monitored the situation from the hideout, their eyes glued to the screens. They watched as the resistance gained ground, their forces pushing back against the regime. It was a hard-fought battle, but the tide was turning in their favor. As the day wore on, reports began to come in from the field. The resistance had secured several key locations, and the regime's forces were in disarray. It was a significant victory, a major blow to the regime's control, but the fight was far from over. That evening, the leaders gathered for a debriefing, the atmosphere charged with excitement and anticipation. General Seraphine stood at the head of the table, her expression a mix of pride and determination. "We've made significant progress," she announced, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "The regime is on the defensive, and the people are rallying to our cause. But we must stay vigilant. The fight is far from over." Celestia nodded, her expression serious. "We can't let our guard down," she agreed. "The regime will not go down without a fight. We must be prepared for their counterattack." Stephen listened intently, his mind racing with plans and strategies. They had won a major battle, but the war was still raging. They needed to maintain their momentum, keep the pressure on the regime. There was still much to do, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. As the meeting concluded, Stephen felt a sense of determination settle over him. They had come so far, overcome so many obstacles, but the journey was not yet over. He looked at Celestia, who stood tall and resolute, her eyes filled with a fierce resolve. They were in this together, and they would see it through to the end. As the leaders dispersed, Stephen and Celestia found themselves alone in the observation room once more. The stars outside were a silent witness to their journey, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the challenges they faced. Stephen turned to Celestia, his expression serious. "We did it," he said quietly, a note of awe in his voice. "We actually did it." Celestia smiled, a soft, genuine smile. "It's only the beginning," she replied, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But it's a good start." Stephen nodded, feeling a surge of hope. I had achieved a significant victory, but there was still much to do. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but they were ready to face it together. As he looked into Celestia's eyes, he felt a deep, unbreakable bond between them. They were partners, allies, friends, and together they would fight for the future of Elysium. As they stood side by side, gazing out at the stars, Stephen knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. The gathering storm had arrived, and they were ready to face it. The fight for Elysium was far from over, but with Celestia by his side, Stephen felt a renewed sense of purpose. They would reclaim their home, restore peace and justice, and build a better future for all. And so, with the stars as their witness and the galaxy as their battlefield, Stephen and Celestia prepared for the next chapter in their epic saga. The road ahead was uncertain, but they faced it with courage and determination, ready to fight for what they believed in. The gathering storm was upon them, and they were ready to weather it together. The Resistance hideout buzzed with renewed energy in the aftermath of the successful operations. The victories across Elysium had sparked hope among the people, a glimmer of light piercing the long-standing dark. Yet within the hidden base, the air was thick with an undercurrent of tension. The fight was far from over, and the regime's inevitable retaliation loomed large. The Resistance had struck a significant blow, but now they faced a critical juncture, consolidating their gains and preparing for the next phase of the battle. Celestia and Stephen spent the days following the operations in a flurry of activity, coordinating with Resistance leaders and rallying support. The underground hideout had become a microcosm of Elysium's hopes and fears, a place where strategy and courage met in equal measure. The walls seemed to hum with the weight of their purpose, each corridor and chamber filled with the whispers of plans and the echo of footsteps hurrying to their duties. One morning, as the base stirred to life, Celestia found herself in a briefing room with General Seraphi, Captain Lyra, and several key members of the Resistance. A large holographic map of Elysium's major cities and strategic points floated above the table, displaying the current state of the conflict. Red markers indicated enemy strongholds, while blue markers represented the growing influence of the Resistance. Seraphine's voice cut through the tension. "We've managed to destabilize several key locations, but the regime's core forces remain strong. They're regrouping, likely preparing for a counterattack. Our priority now is to fortify our positions and rally more support from the civilian population." Celestia leaned forward, her eyes scanning the map. "We need to secure our supply lines and communication networks," she said, her tone decisive. "If we can maintain control over these, we can keep the momentum on our side. We also need to increase our broadcasts, keep the people informed and inspired." Lyra nodded in agreement. "We've already seen an increase in defections from the regime's forces. Many soldiers are loyal to the old ways, to your family. If we can reach them, convince them to join us, it could turn the tide." Stephen, standing by Celestia's side, spoke up. "What about the royal palace? It's still the regime's stronghold. Taking it back would be a massive blow to their morale and a symbolic victory for us." The room fell silent as the leaders considered his words. The royal palace, once the heart of Elysium's government, had become a fortress under the regime's control. It was heavily guarded, a daunting target. Yet Stephen was right. Reclaiming it would be a significant step toward victory. General Seraphine's face was grave. "It's a dangerous proposition. The palace is fortified with the regime's elite guards, and its defenses are formidable. We'd need a well-coordinated attack, and even then, the casualties could be high." Celestia's eyes hardened with resolve. I understand the risk, she said quietly, but we can't let fear dictate our actions. The palace is more than just a building. It's a symbol of our heritage and a right to rule. We must reclaim it, not just for strategic reasons, but to show the people that the regime's reign of terror is coming to an end. The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. The decision was made. The leaders began to outline the details of the operation, assigning roles and responsibilities. Stephen would lead a team to infiltrate the palace's outer defenses, while Celestia and Seraphine coordinated the larger assault. It was a risky plan, but with careful execution, it could be the turning point they desperately needed. As the meeting concluded, the leaders dispersed to prepare for the upcoming battle. Stephen lingered in the room, his mind racing with thoughts and strategies. He felt a hand on his arm and turned to see Celestia, her expression a mixture of determination and concern. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Stephen smiled, though. His eyes were serious. "I've been ready since the day I met you," he replied. "We'll get through this, Celestia. We'll take back the palace and restore what's been lost." Celestia's gaze softened, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her regal facade. "Thank you, Stephen," she whispered, "for believing in me." Stephen reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "Always," he promised. The days leading up to the assault were a whirlwind of preparation. Resistance fighters trained tirelessly, honing their skills and refining their strategies. Engineers worked around the clock, repairing equipment and setting up communication relays. The base was a hive of activity, each person playing a crucial role in the grand scheme. Celestia threw herself into the preparations, her leadership a beacon of strength and resolve. She met with civilian leaders, encouraging them to support the resistance and rallying the people to their cause. She also reached out to potential allies, hoping to secure additional resources and manpower. Despite the weight of her responsibilities, she remained composed and focused, a true leader in every sense. One evening, as the base settled into an uneasy quiet, Celestia found herself alone in her quarters. The room was small and sparsely furnished, a far cry from the opulent chambers she had once called home. Yet it felt strangely comforting, a reminder of the simpler times before the queue. She sat at a small desk, staring at a worn photograph of her family, her parents, her siblings, smiling, happy faces frozen in time. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. She looked up to see Stephen standing in the doorway, a concerned expression on his face. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Celestia smiled and gestured for him to enter. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the upcoming battle hanging heavy in the air. "You look like you could use a break," Stephen said gently, his eyes searching hers. Celestia sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's just everything," she admitted. "The responsibility, the uncertainty. It's a lot to carry." Stephen reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You're not alone in this," he reminded her. "We're all in this together, and no matter what happens, we'll face it as a team." Celestia looked into his eyes, finding comfort in his words. She felt a swell of gratitude for his unwavering support, for the bond they had forged in the midst of chaos. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Stephen smiled, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "We'll get through this," he promised. The night before the assault, the resistance forces gathered in the main chamber for a final briefing. The atmosphere was tense but resolute, a collective determination settling over the group. General Seraphine stood before them, her expression serious. "Tomorrow, we take the first step towards reclaiming Elysium," she declared, her voice strong and unwavering. "We've trained for this, prepared for this. Now, it's time to put our plans into action. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for our future, for our children, for the legacy of Elysium. Stay strong, stay focused, and stay together. Victory is within our reach." The room erupted in cheers, a wave of energy washing over the crowd. Stephen felt a surge of adrenaline, a fierce determination settling in his chest. He glanced at Celestia, who stood tall and proud, her eyes blazing with resolve. She was a beacon of hope, a symbol of all they were fighting for. As the briefing concluded, the resistance fighters dispersed, each person heading to their assigned post. Stephen and Celestia exchanged a meaningful glance, a silent promise passing between them. They would see this through no matter the cost. The next morning dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the battle to come. The resistance forces moved out, their movement swift and silent. Stephen led his team through the twisting tunnels of the hideout, their path lit only by the dim glow of their equipment. The air was heavy with anticipation, each step bringing them closer to the palace in the decisive moment. As they neared the palace's outer defenses, Stephen signaled for his team to halt. They crouched behind a cluster of rocks, surveying the scene. The palace loomed ahead, its once grand architecture now marred by the regime's militaristic modifications. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their expressions grim and alert. Stephen took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. He turned to his team, his voice low but firm. Remember, we need to disable the security systems and create a distraction. Stay focused and stick to the plan. Let's do this. See, with a final nod, the team moved into action. They split into small groups, each with a specific task. Stephen led his group towards a security station, their movement swift and silent. They reached the station without incident, the guards unaware of their presence. Stephen signaled to one of his team members, a skilled hacker named Zara. She quickly set to work, her fingers flying over the control panel. The system beeped in protest, but Zara remained focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. Moments later, the lights flickered and the alarms fell silent. The security systems were down. Good work, Stephen whispered, his voice tense with anticipation. Now, let's give them something to think at. He activated his comms, signaling the rest of the team. Within moments, the sound of explosions echoed through the air, followed by shouts and chaos. The distraction had begun. Stephen's team moved swiftly, using the chaos to their advantage. They engaged the guards, their blasters firing in quick, precise bursts. The guards, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to respond. As the battle raged on, Stephen led his team deeper into the palace grounds. They moved with precision, neutralizing enemies and securing key positions. The sound of combat filled the air, a cacophony of blaster fire and shouted orders. Stephen felt a surge of adrenaline, his focus razor sharp. This was it, the moment they had been prepared. Meanwhile, Celestia and General Seraphine led the main assault force. They advanced through the palace's main gates, their forces cutting through the regime's defenses with a relentless determination. Celestia fought alongside her soldiers, her movements graceful and deadly. She wielded her blaster with precision, each shot a testament to her skill and resolve. Her presence inspired those around her, a beacon of hope in the midst of the chaos. As the battle raged on, Celestia's forces gained ground, pushing the regime's soldiers back. They reached the palace's inner courtyard, a wide open space surrounded by towering columns and intricate statues. It was here that the regime had made its last stand, the final line of defense around the heart of their power. Stephen and his team joined the main force, their faces streaked with sweat and grime. He spotted Celestia in the midst of the chaos, her expression fierce and focused. She met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. They were close, so close to reclaiming the palace, to restoring what had been lost. The final push was a brutal, intense struggle. The regime's elite guards fought with a desperate ferocity, knowing that their defeat would mean the end of their rule. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of blaster fire. The ground was littered with debris and the fallen, a grim testament to the cost of the battle. Amidst the chaos, Stephen found himself face to face with one of the regime's commanders, a tall, imposing figure clad in black armor. The commander sneered, raising his blaster. "You think you can take this palace?" He taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but a ragtag group of rebels." Stephen's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his blaster. "We're more than that," he shot back. "We're the future of Elysium." With a swift motion, Stephen dodged the commander's shot and fired back, his blaster bolt striking the man's chest. The commander staggered, a look of shock crossing his face before he crumpled to the ground. Stephen stood over him, breathing heavily. The battle was nearly over. As the last of the regime's forces were subdued, a tense silence fell over the courtyard. The resistance fighters stood amidst the rubble, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle had been won, but the cost was high. Stephen felt a wave of emotions wash over him, relief, pride, and a deep, aching sorrow for the lives lost. Celestia stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. She looked around at the scene before her, the palace that had once been her home, now scarred by war. Her eyes shone with a mixture of sorrow and determination. She had reclaimed her throne, but the fight was far from over. With a deep breath, Celestia addressed the gathered resistance fighters, her voice carrying through the stillness. Today, we have taken a crucial step towards reclaiming Elysium, she declared, her voice strong and unwavering. We have shown the regime that we will not be silenced, that we will fight for our freedom and our future. But our work is not done. We must continue to stand together to fight for justice and peace. Together we will rebuild our home, and together we will create a new future for all of Elysium. The crowd erupted in cheers, a wave of hope and determination sweeping through the courtyard. Stephen felt a swell of pride, not just for Celestia, but for all the brave souls who had fought alongside them. They had achieved a significant victory, but the road ahead was still long and uncertain. As the resistance forces began to secure the palace and tend to the wounded, Stephen and Celestia found a moment of quiet amidst the chaos. They stood together on a balcony, overlooking the courtyard, the cool night air washing over them. The stars above shone brightly, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the journey that still lay ahead. Celestia turned to Stephen, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We actually did it." Stephen smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Yeah," he replied, his voice soft. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. There was so much to say, so much they had been through together, but in that moment, words seemed unnecessary. They understood each other in a way that went beyond words, a bond forged in the fires of battle and the depths of their shared purpose. As the night wore on, Stephen and Celestia continued to stand together, their eyes on the horizon. The battle for Elysium was far from over, but they had taken a significant step towards reclaiming their home. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but they were ready, together. In the quiet of the night, under the watchful gaze of the stars, Stephen and Celestia made a silent vow to each other, to their people, and to the future of Elysium. They would see this through no matter the cost. They would fight for a better future, for a world where peace and justice reigned. And together they would build that future, one step at a time. The gathering storm had broken, and in its wake, a new dawn was beginning to rise. The reclaimed royal palace stood as a battered monument to the resistance's resolve. Its once pristine walls, now marred with scorch marks and crumbling stone, echoed the battle's ferocity. Yet amidst the damage, there was a sense of hope, a flicker of the life that once thrived within its halls. The victory had been hard-won, but the fight was far from over. The regime still held significant power, and the heart of their grip lay within the palace itself, where key prisoners were being held, including members of Celestia's family. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, the resistance prepared for their next crucial mission, infiltrating the palace's inner sanctum to rescue the captives. This operation would be delicate and dangerous, requiring precision and stealth. The regime's forces were still reeling from their defeat, but they remained a formidable foe. Any misstep could lead to disaster. In a makeshift war room set up in one of the palace's less damaged chambers, Celestia, Stephen, and the key members of the resistance gathered around a large holographic display. The room was dimly lit, the blue glow of the hologram casting eerie shadows on the faces of those present. The tension was palpable, a shared understanding of the high stakes hanging heavy in the air. General Seraphine stood at the head of the table, her expression grim but determined. She gestured to the holographic map, highlighting the palace's lower levels, a maze of corridors and chambers, heavily guarded and laced with security measures. The regime's holdouts are concentrated here. She explained, her voice steady. Intel suggests that key prisoners, including some of your family, Princess, are being held in the lower dungeons. This area is heavily fortified, with a high concentration of elite guards. Our objective is to infiltrate these areas, neutralize the guards, and secure the prisoners. Celestia nodded, her eyes fixed on the display. She had learned of her surviving family members' captivity through intercepted communications, a revelation that had filled her with a mix of hope. She longed to see them, to know they were safe, but she also understood the risks involved. This mission could be their most dangerous yet. Stephen stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the gathered faces. "We can't go in guns blazing," he cut. "The goal is to extract the prisoners with minimal resistance. We need to be quick and quiet, take them by surprise. Our best bet is to use the old service tunnels that run beneath the palace. They were built as escape routes during the war and should lead us directly to the dungeons. Captain Lyra, standing beside Seraphine, nodded in agreement. The tunnels have been out of use for years, he added. The regime might not even know they exist. It's our best chance at getting in undetected. The plan took shape quickly. Stephen would lead a small, elite team through the tunnels, with Celestia accompanying them. Her knowledge of the palace's layout could prove invaluable, and her presence might provide a morale boost for any imprisoned loyalists. Meanwhile, the rest of the resistance forces would stage a diversion at the palace's main entrance, drawing the guards' attention away from the infiltration team. As the final details were discussed, Celestia felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. The thought of confronting her family's captors filled her with a cold fury, but she knew she needed to remain calm and focused. This mission was about more than just her. It was about the future of Elysium. With the plan set, the team moved to prepare for the mission. They donned dark, flexible suits designed for stealth, their faces obscured by helmets equipped with night vision and communication systems. The mood was somber, each person lost in their thoughts, aware of the dangers they faced. Celestia felt a hand on her arm and turned to see Stephen, his face hidden behind his helmet, but his eyes shining with reassurance. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Just stay close to me." Celestia nodded, grateful for his presence. "I will," she promised, her voice firm. The team set off as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into twilight. They moved swiftly and silently, slipping through the palace's sprawling gardens and into a hidden entrance to the tunnels. The air was cool and damp, the narrow passageways echoing with the sound of their footsteps. The walls were lined with ancient stone, etched with faded carvings that spoke of a time long past. As they descended deeper into the tunnels, the air grew colder, the darkness pressing in around them. Stephen led the way, his eyes scanning the path ahead, every sense alert for danger. Celestia followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the weight of her people's hopes on her shoulders, a heavy burden that she carried with quiet determination. The team moved with practiced precision, navigating the twists and turns of the tunnels with ease. They encountered no resistance, the tunnels seemingly abandoned and forgotten. But as they neared their destination, the air grew tense, a palpable sense of foreboding settling over them. Stephen held up a hand signaling for the team to halt. "We're close," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the tunnel's old electrical systems. "The dungeon should be just ahead." They continued forward, their movements cautious and deliberate. The tunnel widened into a larger chamber, its walls lined with old, rusted machinery. In the dim light, they could see a large metal door set into the far wall, partially obscured by shadows. Stephen approached the door, motioning for the team to stand ready. With a soft click, he activated a small device and placed it against the door. The device hummed quietly, emitting a faint blue light. Moments later, the door's locking mechanism disengaged with a soft hiss. Stephen pushed the door open, revealing a narrow stairwell that led deeper into the palace. They moved quickly, descending the stairs and emerging into a long corridor lined with cells. The air was cold and stale, the stone walls dripping with moisture. The corridor was dimly lit, the only sound the distant drip of water and the faint hum of the palace's electrical systems. The atmosphere was oppressive, a heavy silence that seemed to press down on them. As they advanced, the team fanned out, checking each cell for prisoners. Most were empty, the metal doors standing ajar. But as they reached the end of the corridor, they found a group of people huddled in the last few cells. Celestia's heart leapt into her throat as she recognized the familiar faces. Members of her family, gaunt and pale but very much alive. "Celestia," a voice called out, trembling with disbelief. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, and Celestia's breath caught in her throat. It was her younger brother, Lysander, his once vibrant eyes now shadowed with fatigue and fear. "Lysander," Celestia whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She rushed forward, the rest of the team following suit. Stephen quickly moved to unlock the cell, his movements swift and efficient. As the door swung open, Celestia embraced her brother, tears welling in her eyes. He clung to her, his body trembling with relief. I thought I'd never see you again," he murmured, his voice breaking. Celestia pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "You're safe now," she reassured him, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "We're getting you out of here." She turned to the others in the cell. Her cousins, her uncle, and a few loyal servants who had been imprisoned alongside them. They looked up at her with a mixture of hope and disbelief, their eyes reflecting the weight of their ordeal. Celestia felt a surge of determination. She would not let them down. As the team helped the prisoners to their feet, Stephen kept a watchful eye on the corridor. "We need to move quickly," he urged, his voice low. "The diversion won't hold them for long." Celestia nodded, her expression hardening. "Let's go." They began their retreat, moving swiftly through the corridor and back towards the stairwell. The air was thick with tension, each step echoing in the narrow space. As they reached the stairwell, the sound of distant voices and heavy footsteps reached their ears. The regime's forces were closing in. Stephen glanced at Celestia, his eyes sharp with urgency. "We need to move faster," he said, his voice a tense whisper. Celestia nodded, urging the group forward. They ascended the stairs as quickly as they could, their movements hampered by the weakened state of the prisoners. The voices grew louder, closer. There was no time to lose. As they reached the top of the stairwell, the team emerged into a small, dimly lit room. Stephen quickly assessed the situation, his eyes darting to a nearby door. "This way," he directed, motioning for the group to follow. They hurried through the door and into another corridor, this one lined with ornate tapestries and portraits. The opulence of the surroundings was a stark contrast to the dankness of the dungeons, a reminder of the palace's former glory. Stephen led them down the corridor, his senses on high alert. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of regime soldiers. The soldiers' eyes widened in shock, but they quickly recovered, raising their weapons. Stephen reacted instinctively, pushing Celestia behind him as he fired a burst from the shots hit their marks, the soldiers crumpling to the ground. As the team continued forward, their pace quickening. They could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the halls, the clash of weapons and the shouts of soldiers. The resistance's diversion had escalated into a full-blown confrontation, drawing the regime's forces away from their path. As they neared the palace's outer walls, Stephen activated his comm, signaling the extraction team. "We're almost at the extraction point," he reported, his voice steady. "Prepare for evac." The comm crackled with a response. "Copy that. Extraction team is en route." The group reached a side entrance, its heavy wooden doors slightly ajar. Stephen pushed them open, revealing a narrow passage that led to a hidden courtyard. The night air was crisp and cool, a welcome relief from the stifling heat of the palace. As they emerged into the courtyard, the extraction team arrived, a small group of resistance fighters armed and ready. They quickly moved to secure the area, their weapons trained on the surrounding walls. Stephen and Celestia guided the prisoners towards awaiting transport, their movements swift and efficient. As the last of the prisoners were loaded onto the transport, Stephen turned to Celestia, his expression one of relief and determination. "We did it," he said, a hint of a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. Celestia nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Stephen," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Stephen reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It was an honor," he replied, his voice sincere. As the transport's engines roared to life, the group hurried aboard. The courtyard was filled with the sounds of battle, the distant echoes of blaster fire and shouted commands. The regime's forces were regrouping, their anger palpable, but the resistance had achieved their goal. The prisoners were safe, and the regime's grip on the palace had been weakened. As the transport lifted off, Stephen and Celestia stood at the open hatch, watching the palace grow smaller in the distance. The city below was a sea of lights, the night sky above a canvas of stars. They had won a significant victory, but the battle was far from over. The regime would not take this loss lightly, and the fight for Elysium's future was far from decided. As the transport sped through the night, Celestia felt a mix of emotions wash over her: relief, exhaustion, and a fierce determination. She glanced at Stephen, who stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. They had come so far, faced so many challenges, but they had also forged a bond, a partnership that had grown stronger with each passing day. In the quiet of the transport's cabin, surrounded by the people they had fought so hard to save, Celestia felt a sense of hope. They had taken a crucial step towards reclaiming Elysium, and she knew they would continue to fight, no matter the cost. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and challenges, but with Stephen by her side, She felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. As the stars stretched out before them, a vast expanse of possibilities, Celestia made a silent vow to her people, to her family, and to herself. They would reclaim their home, restore peace and justice, and build a future where hope and freedom could come together. They would face the darkness and emerge victorious. The night was still young and the fight was far from over. But in that moment, as the transport carried them towards the safety of the Resistance's base, Celestia felt a spark of hope, a light in the darkness. They were not alone in this battle, and together they would create a new dawn for Elysium. The rescue mission had been a success, but there was no time to celebrate. The regime's response was swift and brutal. The skies above Elysium filled with dark clouds, mirroring the oppressive atmosphere that hung over the planet. The palace, once a symbol of the regime's unchallenged power, now stood as a fortress of desperation. The regime's forces had regrouped, fortifying their positions and preparing for a final, decisive confrontation. The resistance knew that the time for the ultimate battle had come, a battle that would determine the fate of Elysium. The resistance base was abuzz with activity. The rescued prisoners, including Celestia's family, were quickly integrated into the preparations. Celestia spent every waking hour strategizing with her commanders, reaching out to potential allies, and boosting the morale of her people. The base, nestled deep within the planet's rugged mountains, had become a sanctuary and a command center. The air was thick with anticipation, every person aware of the gravity of the days to come. In the main war room, a holographic map of the palace and the surrounding city hovered above the central table. General Seraphine, Captain Lyra Stephen, and other key leaders stood around it, their faces grim and focused. The map showed the enemy's positions, marked in red, and the Resistance's forces, marked in blue. The regime had fortified the palace with heavy artillery, anti-aircraft defenses, and their elite guard. It was a daunting sight, a fortress designed to repel any assault. Seraphine spoke first, her voice steady. The regime's forces are concentrated in the palace and the surrounding areas. They barricaded the main entrances and set up a perimeter of automated turrets. Our scouts report that they're massing troops for a counter-offensive. If we don't act soon, they'll tighten their grip on the city and crush any remaining resistance. Stephen leaned forward, his eyes scanning the map. We need to strike hard and fast, break through their defenses before they can mobilize fully. A direct assault on the palace would be suicide with their defenses intact. We need to disable their artillery and anti-aircraft systems first. Lyra nodded in agreement. Our intelligence suggests that the control center for their defenses is located in the palace's eastern wing. If we can infiltrate it and disable their systems, we can launch an aerial assault and bring in reinforcements. Celestia listened intently, her expression thoughtful. She knew that this battle would not only determine the future of Elysium, but also define her leadership. Her eyes flicked to the part of the map that marked the throne room, the heart of the palace where the regime's leaders were likely holed up. She felt a surge of determination. This was her chance to confront the architects of her family's downfall and reclaim her birthright. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice clear and resolute. We need to coordinate a multi-pronged assault. While one team infiltrates the palace to disable the defense, another will lead a frontal assault to draw their forces away. A third team will secure the city and prevent any reinforcements from reaching the palace. I'll lead the team to the throne room. Stephen looked at her, concern flashing in his eyes. Celestia, it's going to be dangerous. The regime's leaders won't go down without a fight. Celestia met his gaze, her eyes steeling. I know the risks, she replied, her voice unwavering. But I can't sit on the sidelines while others fight for my people's freedom. This is my battle as much as anyone else's. There was a brief silence, then Seraphine nodded in approval. It's a sound plan. We'll need to move quickly and decisively. Every second counts. With the plan set, the resistance forces began their final preparations. The atmosphere in the base was electric, a mix of tension and determination. Fighters checked their weapons, technicians calibrated equipment, and medics prepared for the inevitable casualty. Celestia moved among them, offering words of encouragement and support. She felt the weight of their hopes and fears, a burden she bore willingly. She was their leader, their symbol of hope, and she would not let them down. As night fell, the base went into lockdown. The resistance forces gathered in the main hall for a final briefing. The room was packed, every face turned towards the stage where Celestia stood. She looked out over the crowd, taking in the sea of determined faces. These were her people, Men and women who had risked everything for a chance at freedom. She felt a swell of pride and gratitude. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Tonight, we stand on the brink of history, she declared, her voice carrying across the hall. For too long, the regime has held our world in an iron grip. But tonight, we will rise. We will fight for our freedom, for our future, for our families. This is our moment, our chance to take back what was stolen from us. Remember what we are fighting for, and let that give you strength. We are Elysium, and we will not be defeated. The crowd erupted in cheers, a wave of energy that seemed to lift the very air. Stephen, standing beside her, felt a surge of admiration and love for the woman he had come to know. She was not just a princess. She was a warrior, a leader, a beacon of hope. As the cheers subsided, he stepped forward, his voice steady. Remember your training, he urged the fighters. Stay focused, stay together, and watch each other's backs. We've come too far to turn back now. Let's finish this. See, with that, the resistance forces moved out. A silent tide of determination. The night air was cool and crisp, the stars above a silent witness to the events unfolding below. The city lay in darkness, the streets empty and silent, a stark contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface. The resistance had divided into 3 groups, each with a critical mission. Stephen led the infiltration team, while Seraphine commanded the frontal assault. Celestia, accompanied by a select group of elite fighters, would head to the throne room. As they approached the palace, the tension grew palpable. The building loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. The infiltration team moved swiftly and silently, using the cover of night to their advantage. Stephen led them to a hidden entrance on the palace's eastern side, a small maintenance door that led directly to the lower levels. They slipped inside, the cool air of the palace a stark contrast to the warmth outside. The halls were dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stone and age. The team moved with precision, their movements fluid and silent. Stephen felt a knot of tension in his chest, every sense on high alert. They were in enemy territory, and any misstep could mean disaster. As they approached the control center, the team encountered the first line of defense, 2 guards standing watch. Stephen signaled for his team to hold position. He crept forward, his blaster drawn. With a quick, fluid motion, he stunned the guards, their bodies crunkling to the ground. The team moved in, disabling the security systems and securing the area. Stephen approached the control panel, ice fingers flying over the controls. The system beeped in protest, but he remained focused, his eyes scanning the data. Moments later, the lights flickered and the defenses powered down. The anti-aircraft guns, the automated turrets, all disabled. The palace was vulnerable. Control systems are down, Stephen reported over the comms. You're clear for the assault. Outside, the night erupted with the roar of engines and the sound of blaster fire. The resistance forces surged forward, their assault catching the regime's forces off guard. The palace's defenses, crippled by Stephen's team, were no match for the determined. The air filled with the sounds of battle, the clash of metal and the hum of energy weapons. Celestia's team moved through the chaos, making their way to the throne room. The halls were filled with smoke and the acrid scent of battle. They encountered pockets of resistance, regime soldiers desperate to hold their ground. Celestia fought with fierce determination, her blaster firing with deadly accuracy. Her elite guards moved with her, a well-coordinated unit. As they approached the throne room, the resistance intensified. The regime's elite guards, clad in black armor, stood as the final line of defense. The battle was fierce, the air filled with the crackle of energy weapons and the shouts of combatants. Celestia felt a surge of adrenaline, her focus razor-sharp. This was it, the final stand. The doors to the throne room loomed ahead, a massive, ornate structure. Celestia signaled for her team to halt. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. She knew what awaited her inside. Those responsible for the coup, for the suffering of her people. It was time to face them. Listen with a nod. Celestia and her team pushed open the doors. The throne room was vast and opulent, its marble floors and golden accents, a stark contrast to the destruction outside. At the far end of the room stood the throne, a massive, ornate chair carved from the finest materials. And standing before it, flanked by a group of high-ranking officials, was the man who had orchestrated the coup Lord Regent Malachar. Malachar was a tall, imposing figure, his face a mask of cold arrogance. He wore the uniform of a high-ranking official, his dark eyes glittering with malice. He stepped forward, a cool smile playing on his lips. "It's Princess Celestia," he greeted, his voice dripping with mockery. "How kind of you to join us. I must admit, I didn't expect you to survive this long, but no matter. This ends now." Celestia's eyes blazed with fury. "This ends with you, Malachar," she retorted, her voice cold. "Your reign of terror is over. Surrender now, and I might show you mercy." Malachar's smile widened. "Mercy from a traitor's daughter?" He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You are in no position to offer mercy. This palace, this world, belongs to me, and I will not give it up without a fight." With a flick of his wrist, Malachar signaled his guards. They moved forward, weapons drawn. Celestia's team sprang into action, the room erupting in a flurry of movement and sound. Blaster fire filled the air, the crackle of energy bolts echoing off the marble walls. Celestia fought with a fierce determination. Her movements fluid and precise. She fired her blaster, taking down enemy after enemy. Her team moved with her, a well-coordinated unit. The battle was intense, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of blaster fire. As the fight raged on, Celestia found herself face to face with Malachar. He drew his sleek, black blaster, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're a fool, Celestia," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can reclaim this world? It's already mine." Celestia's eyes narrowed. "You may have taken my family, my throne," she retorted, her voice steady. "But you will never take my people's spirit. They will never bow to you." Malachar's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. He raised his blaster, aiming it at Celestia. She tensed, her eyes locked on his. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a sudden, fluid motion, Celestia fired. The bolt struck Malachar's blaster, sending it flying from his hand. He staggered back, a look of shock and rage on his face. Celestia advanced, her blaster trained on him. "It's over, Malachar," she declared, her voice cold and final. "Surrender or face the consequence." For a moment, Malachar's eyes flickered with fear. Then, with a defiant sneer, he lunged at Celestia, a small, concealed blade in his hand. Celestia reacted instinctively, sidestepping his attack and disarming him with a swift motion. She pressed the barrel of her blaster to his chest, her eyes blazing with anger. "Heard enough," she hissed, her voice low. "You will pay for your crimes." Malachar glared at her, his eyes filled with hatred, but he knew he was beaten. With a snarl, he lowered his head, conceding defeat. Celestia felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was over. The regime had fallen. As the last of the resistance forces secured the throne room, the sounds of battle began to fade. The palace was in ruins, its once grand halls now a battlefield. But amidst the destruction, there was a sense of victory, a palpable relief. The regime's grip on Elysium had been broken and the planet was free. Stephen and the rest of the infiltration team arrived in the throne room, their faces streaked with grime and sweat. He spotted Celestia standing over Malachar, her expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. He felt a surge of pride and relief. They had done it, they had won. As the resistance forces began to secure the palace and tend to the wounded, Celestia turned to Stephen, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "It's over," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "We did it." Stephen smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You did it," he corrected, his voice gentle. Celestia shook her head, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. "We all did," she replied, her voice soft. "We all fought for this." As the night wore on, the resistance forces worked to restore order. The captured regime officials were taken into custody, and the palace was secured. The people of Elysium, hearing of the regime's defeat, began to pour into the streets, celebrating their newfound freedom. The air was filled with the sounds of joy and relief, a stark contrast to the darkness that had shrouded the planet for so long. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Celestia stood on the palace balcony, looking out over the celebrating crowds. She felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction. The battle was over, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. There were still wounds to heal, divisions to mend, but for the first time in a long time she felt hope. Stephen joined her on the balcony, his presence a comforting anchor. They stood in silence, watching the sunrise. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns, but they were ready to face it together. They had fought for their freedom, and they had won. As the first rays of sunlight touched the city, Celestia felt a new dawn breaking, not just for Elysium, but for herself. She had found her strength, her purpose, and her people. And with Stephen by her side, she knew they would build a future where hope and freedom could thrive. The final stand had been made, and the battle for Elysium was won. But the journey was far from over. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by their shared purpose and their unbreakable bond. The darkness had passed, and a new day was dawning. A day of hope, of freedom, and of a brighter future for all. The first light of dawn cast a soft glow over the newly liberated city of Elysium. The palace, now a symbol of freedom rather than oppression, stood tall amidst the sprawling urban landscape. The streets were filled with people, their faces alight with joy and relief. For the first time in years, the city buzzed with the sounds of celebration, rather than the fear of tyranny. The regime had fallen, and a new era was dawning. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. The resistance had achieved a monumental victory, but the cost had been high. The halls, still bearing the scars of battle, were filled with the hum of activity as soldiers and civilians worked to secure the area and tend to the wounded. The once grand throne room, the heart of the regime's power, had become a command center for the resistance's efforts to restore order and stability. Celestia stood at the center of it all, a calm presence amidst the chaos. Clad in a simple yet elegant gown that reflected her royal heritage, she moved through the room with a quiet grace, speaking with soldiers, advisors, and the newly freed citizens. Her face, though lined with fatigue, bore a look of determination. She was no longer just an exiled princess. She was the rightful ruler of Elysium, ready to take her place and lead her people into a new future. Stephen stood nearby, observing the scene with a mixture of pride and concern. The battle had been won, but the challenges ahead were daunting. The city was in disarray, the government in shambles. The people needed guidance, leadership, and hope. Stephen knew that Celestia was more than capable of providing all three, but he also knew the burden she carried. He had seen the toll it had taken on her, the weight of responsibility that rested on her shoulders. As the morning progressed, the palace began to fill with representatives from the various factions that had fought against the regime. There were former military leaders, politicians, and civilians, all eager to play a part in the rebuilding process. Celestia greeted each one with a warm smile and a steady hand, her presence a beacon of stability in the uncertain times. One of the first orders of business was to address the immediate needs of the people: food, water, medical supplies, basic necessities that had become scarce under the regime's oppressive rule. Celestia and her advisors worked tirelessly to coordinate the distribution of aid, setting up relief centers throughout the city. It was a massive undertaking, but the people responded with enthusiasm and gratitude, eager to help rebuild their home. As the day wore on, a sense of cautious optimism began to permeate the palace. The regime's leaders had been captured, their grip on the planet broken. But there were still pockets of resistance, loyalists who refused to accept the new order. Celestia knew that true peace would not come overnight. It would require patience, diplomacy, and a careful balance of justice and mercy. In the late afternoon, Celestia convened a meeting with her closest advisors and the newly formed Provisional Council. They gathered in the smaller, more intimate chamber, away from the hustle and bustle of the throne room. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, a sense of purpose uniting those present. General Seraphine, ever the stalwart warrior, was the first to speak. "We've made significant progress in securing the city," she reported, her voice steady. "But there are still rogue elements, particularly in the outer districts. We've received reports of sporadic violence and looting. Our forces are stretched thin, but we're doing our best to maintain order." Celestia nodded, my expression thoughtful. "We need to focus on stabilizing the situation," she replied. "Our priority should be ensuring the safety and well-being of our citizens. We also need to begin the process of establishing a new government, one that represents all the people of Elysium." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The task ahead was monumental, rebuilding a government from the ground up, establishing new laws and institutions, and healing the deep divisions that had fractured the planet. It was a daunting challenge, but one that Celestia was determined to face head-on. As the meeting continued, they discussed the formation of a new council, composed of representatives from all walks of life. It would be a temporary body tasked with overseeing the transition to a democratic government. Celestia emphasized the importance of transparency and accountability, vowing to hold open elections as soon as the situation allowed. The conversation then turned to the fate of the regime's leaders. Malachar and his cohorts were being held in secure custody, awaiting trial. There was a heated debate over how to handle their prosecution. Some argued for swift and severe punishment, while others advocated for a more measured approach, fearing that harsh penalties could incite further unrest. Celestia listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. She understood the anger and desire for retribution, but she also knew that justice had to be tempered with wisdom. "We must be careful," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We cannot afford to become the very thing we fought against. These trials must be fair and just. Let the world see that we are a society that values justice, not vengeance." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Celestia's stance was clear. It would not stoop to the regime's level. It would set a new standard, one based on the rule of law and respect for human rights. As the meeting concluded, Celestia took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. The years of exile, the struggle to survive, the battles fought and won. It had all led to this moment, a chance to rebuild, to create a better future. She felt a deep sense of purpose, a clarity of vision. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready to lead her people, to guide them towards a brighter tomorrow. After the meeting, Stephen found Celestia standing on the balcony of the palace, gazing out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the rooftops. The city, though still scarred by the battle, seemed to glow with a newfound hope. Stephen approached her quietly, his presence a comforting shadow. He stood beside her, looking out at the view. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the day's events heavy on their shoulders. "You've done an incredible job," Stephen said finally, his voice soft. "The people believe in you, Celestia. They see you as their leader, their hope." Celestia turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and weariness. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her voice sincere. "You've been by my side through it. I can't thank you enough." Stephen smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I've been honored to stand with you, to fight for what we believe in." Celestia looked at him, her expression softening. There was a depth of understanding between them, a bond forged in the fires of battle and the quiet moments of camaraderie. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Stephen felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet joy. He squeezed her hand in return, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, his voice steady. "We'll face whatever comes next, together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant shades of pink and purple, the city lights began to twinkle like stars. It was a beautiful sight, a reminder of the resilience and strength of the people of Elysium. They had endured so much, yet they stood strong, ready to rebuild and move forward. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The Provisional Council was established, and plans for a new government were set in motion. Celestia worked tirelessly, meeting with various leaders, addressing the concerns of the people, and overseeing the distribution. She was a constant presence, her calm demeanor and steady leadership providing a sense of stability in uncertain times. Stephen continued to support her, serving as her confidant and advisor. He helped coordinate the efforts of the resistance forces, ensuring that the transition to a new government was smooth and peaceful. He also took on the role of mediator, helping to bridge the gaps between the different factions and promote unity. One of the most significant moments came a week after the battle, when Celestia addressed the people of Elysium from the steps of the palace. It was a historic occasion, broadcast across the planet and beyond. The palace courtyard was filled with citizens, their faces a mix of hope and anticipation. Celestia stood before the crowd, her presence regal and commanding. She wore a simple white gown, a symbol of purity and new beginnings. Her voice, amplified by the speakers, carried across the courtyard and into the hearts of the people. "My fellow citizens," she began, her voice strong and clear, "today marks the beginning of a new chapter in our history. The darkness that has shrouded our world has lifted, and a new dawn is upon us. We have endured suffering and hardship, but we have emerged stronger, united by our shared dreams and aspirations." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "The road ahead will not be easy," she continued. "There are many challenges to overcome, many wounds to heal, but together we can build a future where justice, freedom, and equality reign. a future where every voice is heard and every life is valued. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of emotion sweeping through the courtyard. Celestia felt a swell of pride and responsibility. She was not just a ruler, she was a servant of her people, dedicated to their well-being and prosperity. As the applause subsided, Celestia continued, her voice filled with conviction. I stand before you today not as a queen, but as a fellow citizen, a daughter of Elysium. I pledge to you my unwavering commitment to justice, to transparency, and to the principles of democracy. Together, we will create a government that truly represents the will of the people. We will hold elections, and we will establish a constitution that guarantees the rights and freedoms of all. The crowd cheered once more, the sound resonating through the air. Celestia felt a sense of unity and purpose, a deep connection with the people she had vowed to serve. She knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it with courage and determination. As the speech concluded, Celestia descended the steps of the palace, moving among the crowd. She spoke with the citizens, listened to their concerns, and shared in their hopes for the future. Stephen watched from a distance, a sense of pride and admiration filling his heart. Celestia had become the leader she was always meant to be, a beacon of hope and a symbol of resilience. In the days that followed, the process of rebuilding continued. The regime's remnants were brought to justice, and efforts to restore the city's infrastructure were accelerated. The people of Elysium came together, working hand in hand to repair the damage and build a brighter future. It was a time of renewal, of healing, and of hope. As the weeks turned into months, Celestia and Stephen remained steadfast in their commitment to their people. They faced challenges and setbacks, but they never wavered. Their bond, forged in the crucible of war, grew stronger with each passing day. They were partners in every sense of the word, united by their shared purpose and their unwavering love for all. One evening, as the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow over the palace, Stephen and Celestia stood on the balcony, watching the lights twinkle in the distance. The air was cool and fragrant, the sounds of the city a soothing backdrop. Celestia leaned against the railing, our eyes thoughtful. We've come a long way, she murmured, her voice soft, but there's still so much to do. Stephen nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. We'll do it, he replied, his voice filled with conviction. Together, Celestia turned to him, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and affection. Thank you, Stephen, she said, her voice tender, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. Stephen smiled, a warm, genuine smile. You don't have to thank me, he said, his voice gentle. I'm just glad to be here with you. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their journey settling around them. There was a deep, unspoken understanding between them, a bond that transcended words. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged stronger, united by their love and their shared commitment to a better future. As the night deepened and the stars filled the sky, Celestia and Stephen made a silent vow to each other and to their people. They would continue to fight for justice, for freedom, and for the future of Elysium. They would face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in their strength and their unity. The journey was far from over, but they were ready to face it together. The throne had been reclaimed, the people liberated, and a new era had begun. As they stood on the balcony, gazing out at the city they loved, they knew that the future was bright, filled with endless possibilities. Together, they would build a world where hope and freedom flourished, where every person could live with dignity and purpose. The final chapter of their story had yet to be written, but they were ready to embrace it, hand in hand, heart to heart. And so, under the starlit sky, with the city of Elysium as their witness, Celestia and Stephen looked to the future with hope and determination. They had reclaimed the throne, but more importantly, they had reclaimed their destiny, and together, they would continue to shape the future, one step at a time, with courage, love, and unwavering resolve.